Welcome to episode 5 of This Week in Immigration, where we explore key issues and go in depth on what matters in immigration news. I'm your host, Hunter Hallman, and I'll be hosting these podcasts solo for the next few months, while my usual co-host, Jordan LaPierre, takes a much-deserved paternity leave. You may also notice that there was no new episode last week. We'll be doing a new episode every other week until the end of the year. Subscribe to this and all of BPC's podcasts on iTunes or stream on our website at bipartisanpolicy.org. For more information on what we cover today or for more immigration analysis, visit bipartisanpolicy.org/immigration. To start off today, I'm talking to policy analyst Cris about Temporary Protected Status, or TPS. We just learned late last night that a decision on TPS for Honduras will be delayed until July 2018, and TPS for Nicaragua has been eliminated. Citizens from Nicaragua must leave or change residency status by January 2019. Cris, tell us what exactly TPS is and how many people are covered by this designation.
So first and foremost, the TPS program was created by Congress in 1990. And basically, the DHS secretary can designate a foreign country for TPS status due to conditions in that country that would prevent the country's nationals from returning safely, or where the country is unable to handle the return of its nationals adequately. These conditions can include armed conflicts like civil wars, and environmental disasters such as earthquakes or hurricanes. You can have epidemics, and you can have other types of extraordinary and temporary conditions as defined by USCIS. For the individuals who are part of countries that receive TPS designation, they have to be in the United States, or there could be individuals without nationality who last resided in the designated country. And this gives a range of benefits. You're not removable from the United States. You can obtain an employment authorization document to work in the United States. You may be able to have travel authorization. And once you have TPS status, you can't be detained by DHS based on your immigration status. So it's pretty substantial, the benefits that you get for this. Now, if we're talking about population, right? As of October 2017, the Congressional Research Service found that the total individuals with TPS status is approximately 437,000. The expected re-registrants is approximately 318,000. And in terms of countries, there are 10 countries up until last year. The largest populations are El Salvador with 263,000, Honduras with 86,000, and Haiti with 59,000. So Central America and Haiti are heavily represented among TPS countries.
So what are the implications of TPS being terminated for Nicaragua, and are there other countries the administration is reviewing to be terminated?
Right. So in terms of eliminations, backing up, what happened in September is that DHS actually announced plans to terminate Sudan's designation on November 2nd, 2018. So Nicaragua already has some precedent in the sense of that the administration already has eliminated some of these designations. And there have been some extensions as well. They extended South Sudan's designation by 18 months to May 2nd, 2019. But in terms of what's pending, we're looking at El Salvador and we're looking at Haiti as countries that are being looked at right now that the administration is looking at for extending. In particular, Haiti is going to be more pressing. A decision has to be made by November 23rd, 2017. In El Salvador, the designation will end on March 9th, 2018, and that's something that we'll be looking at. The implications are actually pretty significant because you're looking at a population that has been living here for significant periods of time. You're looking at, on average, recipients from Honduras have lived in the U.S. for 22 years, El Salvador for an average of 21 years, and Haiti an average of 13 years. These individuals from these three countries have had 273,200 children, and they're heavily involved and integrated into the economy. So I think that any decision to basically eliminate the status will have not only repercussions for families, but also economic repercussions as well.
So what are kind of the factors that go into the consideration that the Trump administration is making on deciding whether to extend or to terminate a TPS designation?
So, the State Department issued a memo that talked about whether or not these countries were able to receive individuals who had TPS status, particularly in Central America and Haiti, and they said that they could return to their countries as well. So that's one important consideration. Foreign governments can also lobby. So in the case of Haiti and El Salvador, for instance, those foreign governments have been heavily lobbying the administration to renew the status while Curiously enough, Nicaragua did not, according to the Washington Post. So you sort of have those influence as well. And obviously within the administration, you may have immigration hardliners who see this as a program that sort of rewards individuals for living in the country without documentation. So obviously the hardliners are going to be pushing to have these TPS status extensions basically be eliminated for all these countries. And within the center of all this has been Department of Homeland Security, and Acting Secretary Elaine Duke has been pretty diligent, I think very intentional in her analyses, taking in all these different factors.
So we've talked a little bit about what the administration is doing. Do you think Congress is going to try to take up this issue?
There are three, yeah, exactly. And there are actually two bills that have been introduced. One is introduced, the TPS Reform Act of 2017 by Mo Brooks, Republican from Alabama. This is a little bit more stringent. They want Congress to be able to designate whether a foreign state could be eligible for TPS status, to sort of be able to exert more control over this. What's also notable about this is also if you're lacking lawful immigration status, you can't be eligible for TPS. So that's one approach that they've had. But last week, Nydia Velázquez from New York, Democrat from New York, introduced the American Promise Act of 2017, and this basically allows individuals who have TPS status to basically adjust their status to legal status within 3 years of the enactment of legislation if they were in the United States before October 1st, 2017, and continuously present in the U.S. for a period of not less than 3 years before the enactment in the language of the law. So, this may be taken up, it is being taken up by Congress, but it just remains to be seen whether or not Congress will act on this issue as DHS keeps making these decisions about TPS statuses.
Okay, thanks, Chris. We'll definitely want to stay tuned on this issue in the coming weeks and months. Next, Theresa Brown is here to take us through the immigration policy implications of the recent deadly terrorist attack in New York City on November 1st. Theresa, as we know, President Trump immediately noted that the accused attacker in New York entered the U.S. in 2010 through the Diversity Visa Lottery program and has now called for its repeal. Is there any link between this visa program and terrorism?
So, first of all, our condolences to the victims and the families of the New York tragedy and recent tragedies in Texas, which have nothing to do with immigration. But I think one of the issues that has arisen every time we have one of these attacks in the United States is one of the first questions asked is the perpetrator an immigrant? Where did they come from and how did they get there? This has been true since 9/11, when the attackers all did come from other countries on immigrant visas. And we had an extensive commission that looked at all the ways they came and used our immigration system to perpetrate the attacks of 9/11. So in one way, it's not unusual that the president would first find out, where this person was from and how they got here. But I think the conclusion that was drawn that somehow the diversity visa was a problem was maybe incorrect. In part because the diversity visa is one of 4 major ways that people can legally immigrate to the United States. They can come here based on an employment sponsorship, they can come here based on family sponsorship, they can come here as refugees or asylees, and they can come through this diversity visa. All of those categories, no matter which way you get a green card, require the same or very similar types of screening and vetting. So if this individual had been associated in some way with terrorism or criminality or posed some danger to the United States before his entry in 2010, that should have been found in the vetting process at that time. Now, we have had subsequent reporting that this person may have become so-called radicalized, and that means enamored of the terrorist jihadi message from the terrorists sometime after he came in, maybe even years after. And we've seen that pattern before. We saw the Boston bomber attackers. We've seen the San Bernardino, the spouse, and others in Florida who there was nothing in their background prior to when they came that would have suggested this, and something happened and turned them afterwards. So in this case, I would say it's not the diversity visa itself that needs to be examined in light of terrorism, but it is how we look at screening and vetting people that come to the United States.
So how are immigrants currently screened and vetted in the diversity visa program?
So in the diversity visa program, just like all of the other immigrant visa programs, anyone who applies to come to the United States as an immigrant goes through a series of checks. They go through criminal background checks, both here and in their home country. As a matter of fact, they have to supply information of every place they've lived for more than 5 years and police certificates. They are run through terrorism databases, our own and those we share with our allies. We have asked countries to increase their sharing of their own criminal history and terrorism databases with us to allow their nationals to come in. We verify identity. We check to see whether they have the means to support themselves in the United States. Do they have communicable diseases? There's a lot of things that go into that screening and vetting, and the president has recently increased that. So there are personal interviews that are attached. So there's a lot of ways that we screen and vet people to try to look for these clues. And when there is a potential, or it looks like there might be somebody of concern or from a place of concern, additional checks kicked in with the intelligence community. So there are levels of escalation that can happen when any particular case raises a concern.
So the president also spoke about chain migration in relation to this case, seeming to indicate that the individual in question had sponsored many others to come to the U.S. Can you explain what chain migration actually means and its relevance to this conversation?
So chain migration is a term that is applied mainly by those who seek to reduce immigration in the United States to those who can sponsor additional family members to come to the United States to immigrate. U.S. citizens, we know, can sponsor their spouses, their children, their parents, and also their brothers and sisters to come and get green cards in the United States. If you currently have a green card, you can sponsor your spouse and your children to come to the United States. That process is sometimes called chain migration because one immigrant who later becomes a citizen or has a green card can sponsor other immigrants who can sponsor more. But that has been the tradition in our country, frankly, since its founding. Immigrants have always brought their family members here, even before we had a legal immigration system that specified how many and where they could come from. So in some ways, family-based migration has always been the norm. In this particular case, again, like the diversity visa question, its relevance to this individual is in question. The president did say something about sponsoring 23 other people. Subsequent reporting indicates that this may not have been an immigration type sponsorship. It may have something to do with temporary visas, or maybe even he was just related to other people who were under investigation by the FBI. The issue about chain migration is that there are some who want to reduce overall immigration to the United States. And so they're looking, frankly, for any excuse to say, hey, chain migration is bad and we should end it. In this case, it's unclear that this person brought anyone else in. And even if he had, as I just explained, they would all have been screened and vetted the same way. So it's not really a matter of the category of migration. It's more a matter of what our process is to screen and vet people before they come.
Sure. So to kind of switch gears here a little bit, how does all of this diversity visa issue, chain migration, TPS, play into the end of the year discussion on DACA and DREAM legislation?
So we already know that Congress was looking at some sort of legislative fix for the rescission of the DACA program, something to address the status of Dreamers in the United States. And as part of that, there have been a lot of conversations among Republicans, with the White House, with Democrats about what other things might be part of that deal. Up until now, the other things have mostly consisted of issues around border security, possible interior enforcement. After the attack in New York, the president put additional items on the table. He wanted to try to reconfigure our legal immigration system, and now he wants to eliminate the diversity lottery. He's now raised the issue of chain migration again. As Cris mentioned, now that TPS designations are coming up, Congress is looking at whether or not they should do something for those who hold TPS, which are about, frankly, just under half as many as have DACA, so a not insignificant number of people. So all of these immigration issues are kind of getting thrown into the pot of all of the other end of the year issues that Congress has to deal with. They have to deal with funding the government. They have to deal with reauthorizing certain programs like the Children's Health Care Program in the states. They will have to deal with supplementals to address the relief from the hurricanes and the National Flood Insurance Program. The Defense Department is asking for more money to deal with increasing threats around the world, including from North Korea. All of this is happening in a condensed timetable. Oh, and by the way, Congress wants to do tax reform. So all of this is happening in a condensed timetable at the end of the year. Which of any of these issues ultimately get bubbled up is still to be determined. I do think that the TPS designations, perhaps one of the reasons why the Secretary postponed some of these designations was to give Congress time to act if they chose to do so. There was some indication of that in some of the statements that Elaine Duke made. And Congress is inclined to start looking at these issues now. So we may still see some legislation in the end of this year. I think these conversations will also continue into next year. Whatever doesn't get done as part of this end of the year deal will probably continue to be discussed next year. Congress is definitely back on the immigration train, but what form or format that's going to end up in, I think we don't quite know yet.
So as an update from last time, the president has now said that he does not want DACA tied to end of the year spending. So if that's not going to happen, do we have any idea when it will?
Well, he said he would like it not to happen. I think that the leaders in the House and the Senate are going to have to figure out how best to accomplish all of the number of things they want to get done in the short time frame. And frankly, Democrats have said exactly the opposite. Usually in end of the year spending bills to keep the government open, Republicans need Democratic votes. And the Democrats, many of them have said they won't give the Republicans those votes unless some of these issues are included. So I think it's not entirely in the president's decision-making authority here to determine how it gets done. I think the leadership is going to have to work across the aisle, because all these things are going to have to be bipartisan to figure out how best to get it done.
Okay, thanks for taking us through this, Theresa. And thanks to both of you for being on the podcast this week. To find more of our analysis on immigration, find us by searching Bipartisan Policy Center or on Twitter at BPC_bipartisan. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes by searching Bipartisan Policy Center. We'll be back here again in 2 weeks.